booties for Black girl nerds.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Black Girl Nerds podcast. We are live streaming this. Well, we're actually recording this, and then this will be edited for YouTube later. And we're also going to have this on the audio podcast later. But this is a very special show because we are recapping yet another series. And we're doing more of an overview of the series. We won't be able to recap every episode, but we'll give you an overview. And that's the new FX series, Kindred. So I am here with Ryan and Angelica, who moderates these recaps. Hey, Ryan and Angelica, welcome back.
Hello.
Well, we're going to go ahead and dive into it. But before we get into the episode, just want to, throw in some things here. Follow us on Twitch. Even though the Twitch channel hasn't really popped off just yet, follow us anyway. So that way, once we get that channel going, you will be getting those notifications left and right, and you'll get to see some really cool content along the way. And then, of course, subscribe. You know how to do the things. Subscribe to us on our YouTube channel, and then you can see all of that information down below, our Twitters, our Instagram, all that fun stuff. So, Kindred, it is a new series, which is new for some people, but for us that are familiar with Octavia E. Butler's work, it's very familiar territory. And this is the first time we're actually seeing her work adapted on the small screen, and we're very excited for it. Just a quick shameless plug. We've covered many of Octavia E. Butler's works before on Black Girl Nerds. And if you would like to, you can go on to our website and search for Illustrating Butler, the Kindred graphic novel. Now, this graphic novel was written a few years back, and friend to Black Girl Nerds, John Jennings, we interviewed him, who's the author, along with Damien Duffy, who we also interviewed. They talked to us about doing that graphic novel. So that was something that came out recently, but probably many of you guys are familiar with the original Octavia E. Butler Kindred novel, which was published back in the 70s. I believe in 1979. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead, hand it on over to Angelica to get started with this recap of Kindred, which I'm sure all of you guys have been waiting for this one.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. So, as Jamie said, Kindred, the TV series, is based off the novel The Same Name, which, you were right, was published in 1979 by Octavia E. Butler, who's considered one of the pioneers of science fiction, and she's also considered like the mother of Afrofuturism. So, really excited to see her work come to life on the small screen. Brief overview of the book and the series. It's about a woman named Dana in the present day who falls through times and finds herself on a slave plantation. So it is not your average slave narrative. There's a time travel, science fiction twist to it. There's kind of like a destiny that keeps pulling Dana back to the past. So I feel like after watching the series, or if people who've read the books, I feel like that they think it'll be a satisfying show. I don't think it's not going to be like torture porn watching this show. I don't think it will. So without further ado, what were your thoughts on watching this first episode entitled Dana?
Ryan, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. It was a pleasant surprise for me because at first it was giving me Antebellum vibes, and I was like, I'm not ready for this. I don't want to see a whole TV show on this because I love me some Janelle Monáe, but it was just things that didn't come together and kind of shocking at times in Antebellum. So I was like, I don't know if I want that in a TV show or to redo that a little bit, but without the science fiction here for me, I feel like I kind of would have got lost in this series. I don't know if I would have made it to the second episode. So I love that element that's added into here. So I'm gonna go with I'm in between right now. It's just the first episode.
Okay.
All right. Yeah, definitely antebellum vibes for sure. And that was, I think, sort of the intent of how it was written when Octavia E. Butler first published the novel. But for me, there was some notable differences in the book versus the episode. And then I, noticed as we get into other episodes, the differences continue. But one of the things that I noticed in this very first episode called Dana was that her significant other, Kevin, who we know in the books, is actually married to Dana. And on the show, they're not married. So that was interesting. That's a very interesting change from the books. And then, of course, in this story, they've decided to modernize it, which I think is a good choice creatively, because in the books, I mean, the book was published in the 70s, so it is going to be very dated. So, Dana doesn't have a smartphone. She doesn't have internet access in the 70s. So I think it's a great creative choice for them to go ahead and modernize it. But that's a bit of a shift. But aside from those differences, and we'll dig into that a little bit more, I actually really enjoyed this episode. It was very suspenseful right at the jump, and really enjoyed seeing the performances. And I just love the momentum and the pacing of the story. So I enjoyed it for a first episode for sure.
Yeah. And I would say when Antebellum came out, I could not bring myself to watch it. But when I saw the trailers, and I love Janelle Monáe, but I had been traumatized enough by slave narratives. So I was like, I'm going to have to pass on this. But I thought to myself, oh, that looks a lot like Kindred. So, and, Kindred obviously predates that. So,
yes,
shout out to Octavia for bringing that up. And I would say, to me, it also brought comparisons to Outlander, which I know Kindred predates Outlander as well, but kind of like similar feel. A woman falls through time and, gets pulled back. But yeah, I enjoyed it. The pacing was good. Like you, I like that they modernized it. We weren't set in the 1970s. And, like the fact that Dana was with a white man, that was kind of a little bit more controversial back in the 70s. Not a big deal now. So, I like seeing that. And as we get into other episodes, we see how her significant other deals with parts of that interracial relationship, but in a different context than we would think. So let me just get into the episode. So we open up with Dana, who's played by Mallori Johnson. She's bloody. She's lying on the floor. She's calling for Kevin, who's played by Micah Stock. He doesn't come. And then she starts to painfully get up. She tries to clean off her wounds. Her phone, I see, is tucked in her underwear. She charges it. She changes her clothes. She takes a salt bath. And then she starts looks like she's re-upping on supplies in a bag. And I noticed she's gripping it pretty hard. So I'm like, okay, what does that mean? But for whatever reason, she can't unlock her phone. And she's not able to reach out to whoever she's looking for. The police arrive. Her neighbors are concerned, and they had obviously called it in. But Dana doesn't want to come outside, and so the police end up breaking in while she's emailing someone named Denise frantically about returning, but she has no internet connection. So despite the fact that she's in the present, she still can't get a hold of anybody. And so we flash back to 2 days earlier. Dana's watching an episode of Dynasty. She's jotting down an episode recap, which is something I'm very familiar with from doing these recaps. I was like, oh, I know that format. And she gets a reminder on her phone that she has dinner with someone named Denise, the mysterious Denise that she was sending emails to, who's played by Sophina Brown, and she rushes to get ready. So she arrives, she's late. Apparently Denise is her aunt, and along with Denise is her uncle Alan, who's played by Charles Parnell. And Dana reveals, she's in town, she bought a home, and she's moving to LA permanently. Uncle Alan isn't really pleased about that. He's asking how can she afford a house with no job? And she tells them that she sold her grandmother's brownstone back in New York. And, Alan and Denise kind of give her the third degree. They're very skeptical about her life choices. They chastise her for selling her grandmother's home and buying her house online. they basically fuss her out. But in the end, Aunt Denise offers to swing by to her new place the following day. And the entire time they're being waited on by this, good looking tall waiter who obviously can tell there's a tense discussion. So I'll stop there for your thoughts on that opening and Dana's fussy aunt and uncle.
Yeah, that opening was shocking for real. I was like, kudos to them trying to pull you in already. You already start with the eeriness, the suspense, the horror of it. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think in the book she started out in the prologue, she was missing like an arm when it started.
Yeah.
So it was interesting.
I was waiting for that arm when she got out.
I was like, how do I feel about the arm versus right now? Because the picture she has right now, when you think about the context, look at the trailer, it looks like it was like she got whipped or something, was laying on the ground. From what I was picking up, just off the bat, because you got to take all the context clues. I mean, she's saying something. She's bloody on the ground. She lays into the bathtub, so you're like, okay, something's going left here. But just the way it pulls you in automatically into the drama, where you're already hooked. I got to give them a huge shout out for that. The cast and crew for building that up there. But yeah, I was already to go because I had to know. I just wanted to know what was going on. Why does she have all these? Like you said, Angelica, she's ready to go to war for something. She got something in this bag. So where's she going? Who's she going to fight? So yeah, I enjoyed that part of it.
Yeah, that's a good point about the arm. That's another creative choice that they decided to switch and change from the book. I like the fact that they're making this into like a horror thriller because it wasn't really much of a horror in the book. So I kind of like that shift in tone. I was freaking out when she couldn't get into her phone and she put in the number in too many times and was locked out of her phone. I'm like, oh no, you need to get Face ID, girl. But yeah, this first episode was that moment rather between the scene with Dana and just trying to figure out what's happening with her in her apartment, and then the exchange with her family. I thought that was really that was a really great setup of the relationship that she has with her family, that there's some distance there, and they did a really great way of how can I articulate it? They just did a great way of setting it up and framing it to where we understand that there's some barriers here and that these folks really aren't that close and that there's some ulterior motives involved with this family dynamic. And maybe she moved out to LA because she wanted to get away from some of her family members. So some of her other family members. So yeah, I think that was a really interesting moment to experience and kind of get that background on Dana.
Yeah, and I think talking about the differences between the book and the series, I feel like Dana was more, I think she was still in her 20s in the book. It's been a while since I read it, but I think she was like more together. This Dana of the show seems like a hot mess. So I was just like, oh, they kind of made her kind of like an underachiever. She dreams of being a writer, but she's not really successful at it or hasn't really gotten a real job. And so I thought that was interesting. But yeah, I was feeling for Dana. Like, you expect, to let your family know you're in town, you bought a house, you're going to be close to them, and all they do is like fuss you out. Like, who wants to have that conversation? Right. So, after dinner, her aunt offers her a ride back home and Dana declines. I'm sure she doesn't want to sit through a long car ride with them. And so she decides to like get an Uber, but unfortunately her phone is dead, so she can't get a ride. She ends up, asking for a charger at the bar, and the bartender can't help her out, but her server, who is Kevin, offers her a ride. He says he has a charger in a car, but it'll be faster for him to take her. So they have like a nice little conversation, and they bond over both of them living in New York. He used to be in a band. They both have family members that don't necessarily approve of them, so they kind of have that in common. When they finally pull up to Dana's pad, Kevin's impressed. He thinks it's a nice house. He kind of bids her goodnight, and she like falls out the car. So it's kind of like a preamble to her falling through time. She falls out the car. She breaks her phone. Like I said, this Dana is kind of a hot mess. As she walks into, to the door, Kevin notices she has like these vinyl records that she plans to throw out. And, she's like, yeah, take them. And he's so excited. He's like, Luther freaking Vandross. Like,
that was so cute.
He was just very excited about his new collection. So that night, she's watching another episode of Dynasty, and she's kind of going through Tinder. I've been known to do that a time or two, just bored sitting in your house, swiping left on people. Then she ends up matching with Kevin, and he matches with her. He slides into her DMs. He sends her cheeky messages, and she smiles and she just goes to sleep. But she ends up awakening on the floor in a strange house where she sees a woman attending to a baby, and then the woman leaves. Dana walks up to the baby's crib. She sees that the baby's face down, the best, back on your back campaign. You can't really put a baby on their tummy because they can suffocate. She can see the baby struggling to breathe. So she turns him over on his back, and then she hears voices in the hallway. She sees the child's mother and another woman arguing over the child's sleeping habits. She's, the black woman is telling the white woman, you can't keep coming down here. You got to let the baby sleep. He'll never, like the cried out method, but before the cried out method ever existed. And then Dana interrupts and says, she turned the baby over. He was struggling in his sleep. And the black woman asks, like, who's there and who is she? And she responds, it's Dana. And then out of nowhere, the woman begins to scream and rushes towards Dana. And then Dana starts screaming too. And then she reappears back in her own home. So that was a lot. What did you guys think about her, her interactions with Kevin and her falling back into time?
I'm just glad Kevin was a good guy, because everything that she was doing when she took a ride from, I was like, girl, you don't get into the car and just go with some random guy that's in the thing, even though he announced himself in the restaurant and all that kind of stuff. So I was just thinking, this is going to go left. Something's not right. Something's not going to happen. Because you guys know I have to read the books afterwards. So I didn't read the book yet. So I didn't know who this guy was. I was just thinking, so she's not going to call Uber, but she get right in the car with this random guy. So I thought that was going to go left. Then she falls out of the car. Like, she already made it to the destination safely. So, get your keys together, get into the house. She's falling out the car. Good thing he was like mesmerized by the records and everything like that. But it's just anything you not supposed to do with a stranger, Dana's doing. So yeah, she definitely a hot mess. Trying to get herself together. So it's good that Kevin is decent, because it's kind of like he's just along for the ride as we see to go. But Dana, yeah, she's just all over the place. So I think that was an interesting dynamic to kind of have them start out that way. And she's kind of like, oh, I don't need these vinyl records. You just go ahead and take those. And he's ready to sell them and everything. But yeah, and I love how she's addicted to Dynasty. Everything goes back to that, and her trying to like binge watch that as it goes throughout the episode. And now when she gets into that whole dream state, we first see why she in this random place from where she is right now. That was another shocking element to me. And the screaming. This is the first time the screaming comes in for me, where it just feels like it doesn't stop. Like the screams on this show are piercing, like to say the least when they start. So I think that was one of those shocking moments where it pulls her back and you're like, okay, wait a minute. Now this is getting real strange. Where was she? So as an audience member, if you don't read where I was at, that was insane. I was thinking, what is happening right now? That's one of those nightmares that you wake up and you're like, yeah, I'm just going to stay awake for, the rest of the night. I'm good.
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack. I think if I can recall correctly, because I'm like you, Angelica, I haven't read the book in a long time, and I did reread parts of the book to prep for the show, but I don't quite remember if they really dug into a flashback showing sort of like the beginnings of Kevin and Dana's relationship. But I think it's kind of nice that we get to see sort of this, the little courtship period before the inevitable relationship begins between Kevin and Dana. So that's kind of nice to see that aspect play out in this series, because I don't think we get that. I think the only backstory that I do remember from the book is that her aunt approves of their interracial relationship because she wants a light-skinned niece or nephew.
Wow.
And yeah, like there's a colorism issue with her. the her other family members, I believe, didn't approve. But yeah, so that dynamic is interesting to see that, and I like Kevin. The actor Micah Stock that plays Kevin. I haven't seen him in anything, but he gives me Seth Rogen vibes. I don't know. There's something about his demeanor and the way he sounds when he talks. He's just got this Seth Rogen vibe, and I kind of like that. He's very appealing in that way. But yeah, we'll see how this all plays out with the screaming and stuff. I mean, obviously, something that frightens her and anything that's like a high emotional impact triggers her to have these flashbacks and flash forwards back into the present. There was something else that I was thinking of mentioning, but it completely yeah, I'm having a senior moment. But anyways, I'll think about it and I'll get back to you. But yeah, that's all I have to add for this segment.
All right. So the next day, Aunt Denise, visits like she promised, and once again she's criticizing Dana. She's saying it's a lot of house for one person. What do you plan on doing with your money that was left over from the sale of the brownstone? And Dana's like, it's gonna hold me over until I get hired. And then she criticizes Dana for not giving her a heads up about moving, which I thought was weird. And then Dana's like, what is your problem? Like, are you jealous that my grandmother left me the house? And Denise is like, I was actually part of the decision to let you have the house. Your grandmother thought that having the house would be stability for you. And she mentions that, like, if her mother, Olivia, had some stability, then maybe she would still be alive. And she basically compares Dana to her mother, saying that she's fragile and she's unstable. And apparently her father is dead as well. So, this is a lot for Dana. She's frustrated with her aunt. She feels like, you always said, move out here, we'll be here. We want to be close to you. And then when I do it, you kind of give me grief about it. And like, she's like, you really don't care about me. And I honestly don't need you. So her aunt isn't having it. She calls her a princess. She storms out and she tells Dana she's not okay. And then she tells her to take a shower because apparently Dana was a little funky. So I'll stop there for that brief scene, kind of giving a little bit more background about Dana and her family dynamic.
Yeah, Denise is that person that's hurting and she's trying to be there for somebody else, but she has no idea what she's doing or no idea how to do it. So it was just kind of back and forth of, her saying stuff that maybe she didn't really mean, but it's not really helping Dana out right now. Dana's going through her own issues. So it was just interesting seeing them go back and forth in that dynamic of, and then Denise still just being like, okay, we just had this argument, but you need to take a shower. So you still know that there's that, there's that love there behind them because, it's family. But, as Jamie mentioned earlier, there's something going on here, right? Something's happening where, either it's just Denise, like her aunt has taken this to the grief that she's feeling. She doesn't know really how to express that. The relationship with Dana maybe is kind of taking effect to that. So they don't really have good communication styles on either end. But they're kind of they have each other. They kind of lean on each other because she doesn't have her parents anymore. So that's kind of her support system. So it's going to be interesting to watch this continue to unfold between the both of them.
Yeah, and I'll add real quick, I forgot to touch on this point. She mentions the dream that she had and that the woman that was screaming at her reminded her of her mother. Like, she looks like my mom, but she's not my mom. So I'll turn it back over to you, Jamie.
Yeah, the mom is actually a very significant character in this story, which is interesting because the mom really has no presence. Olivia's mother really has no presence or very little presence in the book. So Olivia is basically a brand new character for the show. So I am curious to know for book readers how they'll feel about this new character being introduced into Kindred. And then and we'll talk about it more because Olivia does play a significant role. Dana being sort of a mess is sort of being, I guess, this characteristic that has been homegrown out of this show based off of the characteristics of her mother, Olivia. And Denise talks about that in their conversation. So it's interesting because I do kind of like the more put together Dana in the book than the more messy, sort of flawed, kind of doesn't have herself together kind of Dana. But I'm willing to see how this plays out. By the way, this is what I had forgot to mention on our last little recap. So the Dynasty binging, I absolutely love that aspect of them showing that with Dana, because I know a lot of writers who love to look at soap operas as sort of their template or as a guide to helping them learn how to be better writers, because some of the best stories and storylines come out of soap opera writing. So anyway, I just thought that that was really cool. And also Dana, mentions later on that, she grew up on soap operas and stuff like that. But yeah, the fact that she's all about, soap operas and that kind of helps craft her as a writer. That's very on point with real life writers.
Yeah, agreed. And to your point about Olivia, I feel like she replaces another character named Alice, if I remember correctly, because I don't know if we have an Alice on the show. But I guess when
Alice
we touch
Greenwood.
yeah, who's well, I don't want to give too much away until we get later on, but I feel like Olivia replaces Alice. So I'll leave it at that. Book readers know what I'm talking about. So Dana does end up taking Denise's advice and she does take a shower. And because she doesn't have a car, she hits up Kevin. They make a trip to Target, which is my favorite place. And she tells them she doesn't have a driver's license because she's from the city. Like, people in New York don't have driver's licenses, and I can say that is
don't have cars. Yeah,
100% true. But LA is not a walking city. You have to drive around. You need a car in LA. So they talk about Kevin's love of music and his band, and they end up shopping for mattresses. And Kevin's impressed that she can afford this expensive mattress. And then they end up having lunch overlooking the city. And he asks about her writing for television. And Dana tells him she's trying to break into soap operas, which was her grandmother's favorite genre. And I think any Black kid growing up was forced to watch stories, their stories with their grandma. So I'm not really a fan of soap operas because I was just bored to death by them when I was little.
What?
I love
Shout out to General Hospital. Come on now.
No, All My Children was my jam. Erica Kane. Woo.
No, not my thing. They're boring to me. I actually really prefer telenovelas. I know it's like the same thing, but for whatever reason, Spanish makes it spicier. So I could watch a telenovela. And it's like telenovelas are like 1 or 2 seasons, and then they do something fresh. With like Days of Our Lives and General Hospital, it's just like 1,500 seasons and people come back to, like, it's just too much for me. So unfortunately, I'm not a fan. So they end up talking about the albums that he got from her, and he asks, like, did they belong to her father? And Dana tells him that both her parents are dead, and it turns out Kevin has a same experience. Both his parents are gone as well, and he says they're orphans, they should make a club, and he offers to help her out with her new place. So he ends up like helping her with her new bed, and apparently she's very appreciative of his kindness. She kisses him and they christen her bed, and then post coitus, Kevin finds Dana's notebook where she kind of diagrams episodes of Dynasty, and he's like, I've never seen Dynasty, and she's like, oh no. That is not good. Let's get you caught up. So they end up binge watching the show together until he falls asleep. So once he's asleep, she kind of puts her computer down. She goes into the kitchen to get a glass of water, and she finds a cat outside. And she starts to hear the voice of a child crying. And then before you know it, she finds herself on the bank of a river, still holding the cat. So apparently Dana can bring things with her when she travels through time. A woman named Margaret, who's played by Gail Rankin, calls out for someone named Rufus, and Dana finds a redheaded child face down in the river. Looks like it's the same child, the same infant that she saved, I guess, years ago in this timeline. So she picks him up, she brings him back to shore. The woman's super frantic about the child as Dana starts to administer CPR, and then the boy wakes up. A man named Thomas, who's played by Ryan Quanten, sorry Ryan if I said your name wrong, arrives and aims a gun at Dana's face, and she begins to scream, and that scream triggers her to go right back to the present day. But her screams end up waking Kevin, who rushes to her side and asks if she's okay. And she ends up recounting her experience to him, and tells him like she wasn't there, like she somehow left. But then there's a knock on the door from concerned neighbors, and Kevin tells him that Dana was just having a nightmare. And they're really convinced, but they do leave. Dana apologizes for what's happened, for all the commotion, and Kevin ends up staying the night and orders them takeout, which I'm like, oh, he's so sweet. I need a Kevin. And he tells he tells Dana that according to the internet, Dana was most likely sleepwalking. But then they end up getting into an argument because he kind of calls her a princess in jest, and obviously that is a sore point for her because that's what Denise called her, and she ends up telling him to go. And as he begins to apologize, Dana starts to hear the crackling of a fire, and she ends up disappearing right before his eyes. And so she finds herself named next to this little boy who ends up being Rufus, who's played by David Alexander Kaplan, and she rushes him out of the burning house. So I will stop there for that, that whole Kevin section.
Yeah, I love Kevin and Dana. Like they are, like you said, they're so cute. And I love how she made them sit down and binge watch Dynasty. And they just have this real cute understanding. It's very light. For somebody like Dana, I think that's a perfect kind of fit for her. Somebody like Kevin that can kind of go with the flow a little bit. He's very laid back. They have the same kind of sense of humor. So I like the beginning stages of this relationship here. And yeah, we're still on this crazy train of just seeing her kind of hop in and out, and you're kind of trying to figure out what's going on. Is slowly kind of piecing together. And I love how Dana, I guess anybody would, but Dana always hops right into action in these time jumps. And I could never figure out. I feel like I would kind of be frozen. And she just writes to, okay, there's a little boy, let me go save him. Good thing she does, because Margaret, like, we'll see more for her. This lady, speaking of hot mess, that's another hot mess right there. So she's just right. So she's just screaming on the bank, her son laying there. It's a good thing Dana did step in action when she did. But yeah, I'm just amazed at how calm, cool, collected she is. She just hops into whatever scenario she's in at that moment, especially given the time period. I think we're around like 1815 or something when it first starts happening or whatever. So just knowing like the context of where she is and jumping right into there without being, because I would have been terrified. I don't know how she's just so calm and she looks around herself a little bit and she's like, okay, let me go and do this. And then, before she gets pulled back. So it's interesting where we kind of put together the pieces of where she ends up, what she adds in, what characters comes in. And the fact that she just took this cat to like 1815, you're like, what? What is happening?
Poor cat.
Yeah, poor cat.
Yeah, it seems like every single time she's pulled back in time is because something is happening to Rufus.
Yep.
So wonder why.
There's a reason for it, but she's kind of like Rufus's little guardian angel. So, Jamie, any thoughts on her and Kevin's romance developing? And
okay. I don't want to be mean. I don't want to be like the negative Nancy of the group here, because I love that you guys have a very positive perspective. And by the way, full transparency, we plan on talking to some folks that are behind the Kindred series. So, but I want to be honest with my opinions. I'm not a fan of this change. And the reason is because Kevin and Dana's relationship, their marriage in the book, plays a really significant role because they're a couple. They, obviously back in the 70s, interracial marriage was very controversial, but there's a reason why Kevin goes through these, adventures or misadventures with Dana throughout the story, which we'll find out later on as you're watching the show. And for Kevin to just sort of be this guy that she just happened to meet, at a restaurant, he was her waiter, and then they hooked up via Tinder, and, they're just sort of casually in the the infatuation phase of this relationship. And then like he's sort of pulled into her drama. I just don't know how, oh gosh, what's the word that I'm looking for? How plausible it is that he sticks around. And I know I'm kind of jumping ahead, but I'm just not a fan of them being casual in a casual relationship. I'd rather it had been them being married. That being said, I totally love the chemistry, the on-screen chemistry between the two actors, Mallori Johnson and Micah Stock. I think they're great performers. I think the way they designed their relationship, how they met at the restaurant and how he offered her a ride and how she met him through Tinder, I think that's all kind of a cute setup. I just kind of wish they decided to keep the way it was, where they were a married couple. But you know, maybe it'll make sense later on, and I'll eat my words. So we'll see.
All right. Yeah, we'll see if that maybe some of the drama strengthens their relationship, or maybe Kevin just likes adventure.
That's one way to put it. Lord.
But we'll see. So she so like I said earlier, she rescues Rufus again. She wakes him up and she asks, like, are we in a dream? And Rufus is like, you're the nigger who haunts our land. So obviously they're in a different time with that hard ER. And he realizes who she is. He's like, you saved me when I was a baby and when I nearly drowned. My mother and my father saw you. And she ends up running away as the plantation owner Thomas begins to call for Rufus, threatening to beat him. And Rufus asks Dana not to leave him because he feels like Thomas is going to end up killing him. It's very clear Thomas is not a good guy. So as she's running away, she's stopped by a slave named Luke, who's played by Austin Smith. And he also knows who she is. He calls her by name, Dana. And he tells her that he knows Olivia. And Olivia is staying with a woman named Hagar. And Luke asks her, are you an angel or something else? And Dana doesn't really know. But he gives her directions to Hagar's house, and then he wishes her luck. En route, she's stopped by a man on horseback. He mistakes her for Hagar and offers her a ride home. He says he really likes her dress, which is a robe, which Dana declines. She can clearly see he's a creep, and so she ends up at Hagar's on her own. And inside is Olivia, who is played by Sharia Irving, and she recognizes Dana. She asks Dana, like, is your last name James? And Dana nods. And Olivia tells Dana that they are in the year 1815. And Dana tells her that, well, she's from 2016. And Olivia apparently has been stuck in the past for 11 years. When she left, Dana was only 2 years old. So we can kind of see that time doesn't really work the same way. It's not parallel. And so, Dana wants to know, is Olivia a slave? And she says, no, she's a free woman. And then she asks Dana how she gets home. Like, how are you able to go back and forth? Because obviously word is spread about Dana and who she is. And Dana doesn't really know. Olivia asks how many times she has come back and forth through time. And she said 3. And then she mentions that she's 26 years old, which is the same age when that Olivia was when things started happening to her. So Olivia asks, like, what has her father told her about her disappearance? And Dana says, well, my dad died in the same car crash that you died in. And this really shocks Olivia. And she asks who's been raising Dana. And then Dana's confused. For all her life, she's thought her mother was dead in a car accident. And here she is sitting before her in the 1800s. And so she's wondering, are you really alive? But they end up hearing cries from outside. The patrolman from earlier, whose name is Daniel, he's played by Adam Bartley, is aggressively questioning Hagar. Hagar and Dana actually have a striking resemblance to each other. And Olivia tells Dana to run. Daniel catches Dana, and he thinks she's a runaway, but Dana scratches him and she escapes. But then he ends up running after her, tackling her. He starts to beat up on her. He starts choking her out. And Olivia knocks him off. And Dana ends up awakening in the present with Kevin bending over him. So she's probably still muddled with confusion on where she is. So she ends up scratching Kevin's neck. And Kevin calms her down and tells her she's not crazy. He saw her disappear and then he saw her reappear. So everything that's happening is real. Dana realizes her mother is stuck back in time, and then she ends up showing Kevin a picture of Olivia, the same woman that from the 1800s. And that's how the episode ends. So I guess I'll give you guys your final thoughts, and I guess we can also get into some of the more of the differences in the book than the series.
So Dana and Rufus, this was the first time for me where Rufus, his language, whenever he's talking to her, starts to really aggravate me as it continues to go on. This is your first little glimpse of it, because it's as she's saving him and you start to get the relationship out, you're still like, so we still got this little white boy and we're in 1815. And that's just that mentality that you have to reset yourself for every time they have this conversation. And she does, not to give too much away, she does end up having some moments where she's like, that's not going to fly. That's not going to work for me. But it's just that first little interaction of having to see them in that time period and her having to, adjust to that, so to speak. And then your name being Rufus is kind of, that's a little red flag too. So you get a little bit of, so that one for me, I was like, okay, all right, they're trying to set us up for something here.
Well, Rufus means red hair, so that's
there
all
you go.
That is.
There you go.
I didn't even know that.
I didn't know that either, but yeah, I just heard the name and just something was just giving me like mischievous or something when you hear where Rufus. I don't know what it is for me when I heard that name. And then shout out to Luke, by the way, because I feel like Luke always comes through as somebody that can kind of guide her. I feel like he's there at a right moment all the time, so I like to see where that's gonna go and him appearing there. And then I'm just gonna go down to Olivia and Dana here. So I'm trying to think how I think this is the moment for me where it became, I wasn't so nervous to continue watching the series because I was really worried about just being stuck in that, we know anytime a character is going to jump, a Black character is going to jump back, time jump, they're going to usually take us to some kind of, slavery, civil rights, because that's just the answer. That's the history. So you get a little worried that that's something you're going to continue to be pulled into in a way. And I feel like this to me added in that other layer that made me curious, that sci-fi layer that I needed, that kind of helped me to hold on to this journey where I didn't feel like it was going to be that dread, so to speak. Like it was a different kind of twist on it, that I wanted to hear something different, like a different narrative that this hit home for me once they introduced Olivia. So I was excited at this point to see, okay, so why does her mom know this? And how does she know this happened? And, why is she still there? And she didn't really die. So I loved how they kind of brought all that back, after you're watching her kind of jump a lot. And there's nothing really kind of making sense at this point if you haven't read anything. And so this one little clue right here kind of gives you this little inkling to keep pushing for me, where it didn't seem like I was going to be stuck in this, like, oh, they're going to be dropping the N-word every 5 minutes. The guy slamming her down on the ground. I don't have time for this for every single episode. So this to me gave it something different that I was needing at this moment.
Okay.
Yeah. I think for people that haven't read the book, I think the first episode may come off as a little jarring and maybe even a little bit confusing, but then towards the end, that mother, the Olivia character, sort of kind of helps put the little pieces of the puzzle together. And who knows, maybe that's why she was created for the show. I mean, Angelica, you mentioned that you think she kind of replaces the Alice Greenwood character. That's interesting. I didn't think about that. But yeah, I think that once we learn more about Olivia, then we kind of understand why these time jumps are happening. But if you haven't read the book, you're like, what is going on? Why is this happening to her? Why is she all of a sudden reappearing and disappearing and then able to take people with her and all of that. But yeah, I so far I'm really enjoying, again, the pacing of the show. I love the way each of these characters are being introduced. I love the performances. I do take issue with the Dana and Kevin relationship, but it's not a deal breaker for me. I think it's good on FX to modernize this. I don't think it would make, I don't know. It just, to me, if it would feel super dated having it take place in the 70s and then we're going back in time again. Mm-hmm. So to modernize it and make it a little bit more empathetic for the viewer. And I think they are framing this as more of like a horror kind of thriller, which I think is cool. I think that is great. But yeah, so far I'm enjoying, the run of this episode and how the pieces are coming together.
Yeah. I like the Olivia edition for sure. I like how it kind of seems like it's a genetic disposition that runs in the family. that they're time travelers. I like that. Interesting that they can't control it. Interesting that Olivia has been stuck there for 11 years in her time. And yeah, it's just, let's see how it ends up. Is Olivia ever going to go back to the future? Is she just always bound to the past? So yeah, I enjoyed that. Any other differences that you noticed from the book to the series, Jamie? Jog my memory.
Very minor difference. On the TV show, she lives in Silver Lake. In the book, she lived in Altadena. I don't know the Los Angeles area very much, so anybody that is listening or watching this, feel free to leave a comment and let us know how far those two communities are. But that was one little difference. But yeah, aside from the differences that I mentioned earlier, Kevin is already married to Dana. It takes place in the 70s in the book. The Olivia character is non-existent in the book. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think the whole conversation, which obviously it ties into the Olivia character between Alan and Denise, that doesn't really happen in the book. But it, I actually kind of think it's an interesting and compelling reason for her wanting to move to Los Angeles. So yeah, cool. So we're now going to do episode 2, which is called Sabina. And we'll break that down for you. And then we will wrap up this entire episode with the breakdowns of episode 1 and 2. And take it away, Angelica.
All right. So we open not where we left off, but from a scene from the previous episode. It's from Kevin's point of view after Dana disappears. He's pretty shocked. I would be too, if someone just vanished right in front of me. So he kind of like grabs his things and he's just like, what the fuck? Like, he's just like, what is happening? What did I just see? And he like runs into the living room to leave, and Dana's there. Just like we saw her in a previous episode. We learned that time passes differently. So she was gone for hours when she left. But that translated to only a few seconds to Kevin in the present. And she thinks it's getting worse. She seems to stay a little bit longer every time she goes back. So she thinks it's best for her to get new clothes because she doesn't want to be caught in a robe the next time she time travels. But there's a knock at the door. The neighbor, Hermione, who's played by Brooke Bloom, who's obviously a Karen, is looking for her cat, Princess Di.
Why she gotta be named Hermione? I mean,
I don't know.
The disrespect.
I don't know.
Yeah, the disrespect. That's definitely disrespectful.
We love Hermione over here. But yeah, so she's looking for her cat, Princess Di, and if we remember, that's probably the same cat that Dana was holding when she traveled back in time. So poor Princess Di is stuck in the past. I'm sure she'll be fine. She'll be fine. And Hermione notices the marks on Kevin's neck from when Dana scratched him. She obviously heard screams. She demands to see Dana, and Kevin's like, she's asleep. And then she starts to question, like, how do you even know her? And, where do you live? Like a bunch of Karen stuff. And, he just tells her, he lives down the street and, he's Dana's friend. Not much more outside of that. So then she asks, like, oh, can I at least look for my cat out back? And Kevin agrees. So she returns back home to her partner, Carlo, who's played by Louis Conchelmi. And she's deeply suspicious of the couple. Obviously, she thinks that like they're beating up on each other. And she posts on the neighborhood message board asking for intel on Dana and Kevin. Meanwhile, Dana calls Denise and asks about her mother's condition. Denise confirmed Olivia was often depressed and she had fits of mania. And then she also was delusional. She would see things that weren't there. And then Dana ends up seeking clarification for how her mother died. Like, was her body ever recovered after the accident? And, Olivia says her body wasn't recovered. They think maybe she decided to, I guess, drown. I don't know. The explanation for why they couldn't find Olivia doesn't make sense. But Dana realizes that her mother must have been driving when the accident happened, and she must have time traveled. And so her mother is alive in the past. And then she also comes to the realization that the cat is stuck in the past too. So it's just not a good time. So Kevin tells Dana they can't stay in the house. The neighbors are suspicious. They know where he lives. They obviously think something is up. If something happens to Dana, he's going to get nailed for it. So he tells her that they have to go. He starts grabbing her arm. And it seems like whenever, and you mentioned this before, Jamie, whenever there's something like really emotional or traumatizing or just anything can trigger Dana to start going back in time. And so she begins to hear Rufus calling for her. Or Rufus screaming, excuse me, but Kevin's still holding on to her. So she begins to time travel, and she brought Kevin along for the ride. So he's only been out with this girl maybe twice, and he's traveling back in time with her. So
that's why it doesn't make sense. Okay,
I'll stop there. Go ahead, Jamie. I'll give you the floor.
That's why it doesn't make sense. Because it's like, if I just met you, I'm leaving. Like, why am I sticking around? I don't know what's going on with you. You got this whole time traveling thing going on. It's freaking me out. I just met you on Tinder. I'm out of here. So it's more plausible and logical that it would be a husband that would be going through these shenanigans than just some guy she met off the internet. Anyway,
he can't go anywhere now. He's stuck in the 1800s with her.
But then he travels back into the present, and then he goes back into the past with her. Anyway, this so I absolutely thought the whole Hermione character, she reminded me so much of the character in the movie Karen. So it's funny that you mentioned that she's a Karen, because if you saw the movie Karen, the actress, gosh, what is her name? Oh God.
Taryn Manning?
Taryn Manning. Thank you. Taryn Manning was like this obnoxious neighbor. And that's exactly who Hermione is in this role. So I wonder if she was somehow, I don't know, inspired by that character. But yeah, very, very real moment with that. And this was a great little setup to just again see how Dana travels back in time and what triggers these flashbacks, these time jumps back into the past, and that it is triggered by some sort of high impact, high energy, emotional triggers. And then, people are involved as well, Olivia being one of them. And I think that there's probably other people involved that we'll talk about later.
All right, Ryan.
Yeah, you got to watch out for them Tinder dates. Yeah, this is pretty intense for Kevin here. But I guess that says something about his character that he hasn't. I would have probably been out, especially when the neighbor showed up and asked me all these questions. I mean, I got this big scratch on my neck. So, but yeah, I guess that says something about whatever's drawn him to Dana, and I guess Dana's lucky because she's spiraling out of control, and this guy's still there standing, answering doors and stuff for her. So I guess that just says something about what he, what he represents, or what he could represent, and just how he's willing to hang it out. Because I would have been like, yeah, deuces, this is not what I swipe for Tinder on. So that's insane. But yeah, and then the Olivia, like her calling her aunt and figuring out that Olivia might have been like, in the car, and it's crazy the way they can time jump, and they don't really know like how many seconds, what it does to them. I think when you see Dana come back, she has like she has like a bruise in her eye. Just a physical toll is starting to take. And you're like, okay, wait a minute here. So they go away for a couple seconds. It's no telling what can happen to them physically, and then they just pop back. So that part to me that I thought was so insane and crazy. But yeah, just the way this continues to unfold, and when Kevin like grabbed onto her, I said, they're not getting ready to do this. I clearly thought he let go when she time jumped or whatever was about to happen, and he was just gonna be sitting there looking like, a deer in the headlights. But when he went back, I said, oh no, this has turned into a whole different other thing. But I was hooked because I was like, let's go. We've taken the white guy back with her, the 1815. We're going to see how this turns out.
He's insurance.
Yes. Exactly. There you go. Yep.
She need that. But yeah, it was interesting. So once again, we obviously can figure out that anytime Rufus is in danger, Dana shows up. And so she ends up calling for Kevin because she actually left him behind to go help out Rufus. She's like, Rufus, I'm coming. And Kevin's kind of in the middle of the woods in the middle of the winter throwing up because time travel doesn't do well for his body. So Kevin, walks up and finds Dana leaning over an injured Rufus who apparently has fallen from a tree. And she tells a slave boy named Nigel, who's played by Christopher Farrar, to go get help. And she sends Kevin with him to ensure that Nigel isn't blamed for what happened to Rufus. Kevin and Nigel are confronted by Luke, who sends Nigel to fetch a doctor. And Luke asks, who are you? Kevin says that they're travelers who happened upon Rufus. And he's reciting, he's a bad liar. He's reciting what Dana told him to tell anyone that ask. And he's like, we're travelers who happened upon, he's just not the best at deceiving people. So they end up getting Rufus. Luke brings him back to the plantation, and Dana just continues to reassure Kevin to stay calm. Oh my God. Sorry. Can you guys hear my cat going crazy?
Mm-mm.
Okay. She's scratching up a storm and it was distracting me. Okay. So yeah, she reassures Kevin to stay calm. When they arrive at the big house, Margaret is in hysterics, which apparently is her nature, over Rufus's injuries. Thomas seems annoyed rather than concerned for his son, and he demands they take the demon back upstairs to his room. He questions Kevin and Dana, who reiterate that they are travelers, and he's just like, why are you guys dressed so weird? Well, strangely. And Dana's like, oh, we've been robbed. So she's good on her toes. I can't say the same for Kevin. They're interrupted by Charles, played by Drew Matthews, who's a fellow plantation owner. He advises Thomas, he'll speak to him later. He needs to attend to his son. And Thomas is like, no, stay for supper. And he's just like, no, go take care of her. It seems like Charles is more compassionate than Thomas. So then Thomas is like, can you at least come tomorrow, for our party? And Charles is like, we'll see. And he leaves. So Thomas invites Kevin inside and orders Sabina, who's played by Cherry McBride, to get Kevin some decent clothes and boots. And Kevin is freaking out. He's not handling this well. And Dana just keeps telling him to remain calm. They'll figure out when she finds her mother. So Dana is taken to the kitchen by a mute girl and speaks to the cook. She's asking for Olivia, but that cook is busy. She don't got time for this. She's like, I got a job to do. She's making supper for the master. She tells Dana to have a seat. She ends up being found by Luke. And he has an interesting question because he the previous episode he asked if Dana was an angel, and then this time he was like, have you arrived with the devil? He thinks Kevin is the devil. And she's like, no, he's just a friend. And she asked him to take her to Olivia, and he says it's too cold to travel, so she's just gonna have to wait. And she learned that it's been a few months since they last saw Dana at the plantation. So I'll stop there for your thoughts on all the things that have happened since they got back in time.
Yeah, watching Kevin and Dana navigate this world, and Kevin is just so just out of it. He's just stumbling around. The words are not coming out, and Dana's just ready to go. And it's like, sir, your life is not as at risk as hers is. It's like, get it together. But he's just, barely hanging on as she goes along, because we know now that she has this mission of trying to find Olivia. So now that kind of gives us that little inkling to hold on to as she time jumps, what she's kind of looking for and that drive that she has now. And we like, Lord, I hope Kevin don't mess it up for her, because he was struggling as he's going through this. But yeah, and just meeting Thomas, him and Margaret are I don't know where they get this relationship from. They are characters, both of them. One is on the opposite ends when it comes to Rufus. Thomas, he could care less. He I'm tired of this boy. He just be existing. Why is he always getting into something? And Margaret is her whole world is just true. She's that mama bear, but she's way too over the top sometimes. It seems when it comes to she's he's dying and she's just sitting there, she's just laying over him, screaming, not really being helpful. And you just always see Dana come in, kind of swoop in and is trying to fix the situation. So good thing for the guardian angel of Dana, because Margaret is a hot mess, boy. As your mama, that girl's a trip. But yeah, it's just interesting to see them, and then being on the plantation, and you got the Sabina coming out and something's not quite right with her, and she's trying to get Kevin dressed, and I don't know. I mean, the whole thing is just creepy and weird, and you're just trying to figure out the different players and how they're going to interact and what's going to go left. Are they going to believe the story? Because you got these two people showing up there together. You got a white man, a black woman together. They're wearing different clothing. They're talking different. So what is getting ready to happen? So it's like a lot of just like tension and suspicion, like that's building in these moments.
Jamie?
Yeah, I mean, I forgot to mention when we were recapping episode 1, Ryan Kwanten, I think that's how you pronounce his last name. I had the biggest crush on him when he played Jason Stackhouse on True Blood. I just want to get that out the way. So seeing him in this role, I'm like, oh. But yeah, Thomas, he's not a good dude. He is obviously not at all empathetic or even sympathetic towards his own son, and it makes me wonder why he's so disconnected. But yet, and I don't know, maybe I'm jumping ahead, but he's connected towards other family members or people in his life that we find out. So there's some complexities with his character that is an interesting dynamic that we come to figure out about Thomas in this show. Margaret, on the other hand, I really don't like her. I don't like her at all. She is the epitome of like just, the white woman that just, cries wolf at everything and blames Black people for everything and lies about Black people doing this, that, and the third. She's that type of white woman. But yeah, she's doing the most, and just how standoffish she is towards Dana is so repulsive to me. But I don't think I had expanded on how she immediately is dismissive towards Dana in episode 1 when Dana is literally saving her son's life. She's like, get off of them. But, for her to be so protective over her son, she doesn't recognize when another human being is trying to save her own son's life. So, yeah, the hypocrisy is at like ridiculous levels with that woman. But yeah, this was a very interesting sequence of events that we come to see in episode 2. And then we get introduced to the namesake of this episode, which is Sabina, which my heart hurts for her. My heart hurts for her. I know we're going to talk about her more, but yeah.
Yes. So back in the house, Sabina, who seems to be suffering from some type of disease that affects her feet. She has a lot of, she can't wear shoes. Her feet are wrapped and she just kind of shuffles around. She brings clothes to Kevin. She tries to dress him. And Kevin, being a modern day man, is like, I got it. Like, oh, you don't need to help me. I got this. And you can see he's trying to make a phone call. And like, Kevin's not very bright. I don't know why he thought making a phone call from the 1800s would somehow get to help in the present. But
that's an amazing service right there. I'm with it.
Right. Yeah. He tried. Thomas enters and is displeased that Sabina is not dressing Kevin. And Kevin insists he can dress himself and Thomas ends up dismissing Sabina. So then obviously Thomas is curious about this new guest of his. He asks about the robbery, and Kevin, being a terrible liar, just tells him about the encounter. And it's just not a convincing story, but Thomas seems to buy it. But I don't think Thomas is very bright either. He asks where they're headed, and Kevin states that he and Dana are headed south. And he's like, Dana, that's the name of your slave? And Kevin's like, yeah, she's my slave. And he's like, oh, she talks really strange. Where did you what do you say? Where did you procure her from? And he says he got her from New York. And he's like, is that how all Negroes speak? And he's like, well, that's how Dana talks. And so he's just like, you should trade her in for a more docile slave. Like, she's gonna be problems. She's probably the reason why you got robbed. And I thought that was kind of funny. And then Kevin, of course, being Kevin, asked to go to the bathroom. And Thomas is like, you want to take a bath? And he's like, no.
So funny.
I want to relieve myself. He's like, oh, the privy's out back. So I thought that was so funny. Yeah, they're like, what's a bathroom? So Kevin finds Dana, and he says, like, Thomas thinks that you're my slave. He's very uncomfortable and kind of shocked by that. And Dana's like, well, yeah, that doesn't surprise me. She tells Kevin, like, they have to play along. She can't control her abilities, and they'll figure it out. She just says, like, just tell them that we can't be separated, and at some point, we'll return back to the present. And so she's just winging it. So I'll stop there for your thoughts.
Yeah, I just like how Kevin is really horrible at this, and Thomas just like, oh yeah, that adds up. Yeah, so you had this on, and you just got robbed, and like you seen anybody else wearing that T-shirt, but it was just like, him being a white guy, he's in that time period. It's like, oh yes, oh yeah, that makes sense. Oh, we good.
Yeah.
As opposed to like everybody just straight up just wanting to take Dana out like at any moment, like looking at her like, what is happening right now? So I thought that was interesting, but yeah, I'm just like, Kevin, did you read any kind of history book? I don't know, maybe he did. Maybe he just kind of been oblivious to the whole thing, but he was just coming up like he never heard anything like this in his life. And I guess as audience members, I guess we want to see him uncomfortable because, this could potentially be, some relationship she's in the future because we know from the books. So I guess we do want to see him not be, like not just slide right into it like a Thomas or something like, oh yeah, this is my slave I got right over here, when they're supposed to be dating, you know what I mean? Like, so I guess you want to see him be a little uncomfortable, but at the same time, I was like, sir, now you had to look at some history books or something. Like, you got to know what's going on here.
Mm-hmm. Maybe he was too caught up in his music career, though. He was.
There you go.
He's just a music geek. Yeah, he's too caught up in that to really focus on history like that. So I'll give Kevin a pass. But Thomas is really dumb. I just think like for you to buy that is just crazy to me. But you know what? It speaks to white privilege. That you can be white and just get away with anything, because obviously if this was a black man that was traveling with Dana instead, oh man, it'd be completely, obviously it's in slavery time, so he would not be seen as a free man, and there would be a lot of scrutiny there. But Kevin doesn't really have to even say much or do much, and he's believed. He's welcomed. He's embraced with open arms. And I think that's interesting. It's something that we're observing. Hopefully, more people that are watching it observes. But it's an interesting perspective on white privilege and what it affords white people in the most riskiest and dangerous of situations. White people won't have this situation happen to them, but right. In a situation where you're being questioned compared to a person of color, your whiteness buys you trust that a black person can't afford, unfortunately. But yeah, this was the sequence of events is great. Kevin is trying to get out of there. There is the most logical point, and I talk about logic and plausibility because it's very important. That's why they should be married. But anyway, Kevin does consistently want to get out of this timeline, out of this, whatever that they're in. So that felt very real. He's like, okay, well, when do we get out of here? When do we get out of here? Dona's all like, all right, just chill. I got to talk to my mom first. I got to figure out what's going on with our family history. She's doing her like ancestry.com, 1800s style, So while she's trying to figure out her whole lineage and heritage, Kevin's trying to get the hell out of Dodge. So that felt like a real moment to me. And I appreciated that aspect of the storytelling.
Yeah. I don't know. Dana seems very comfortable in the past.
Yes.
She's like, she's like
we didn't want to get out.
Yeah, she's like a survivalist. She's like, we're just gonna do what we have to do. We're gonna figure it out. And
I'll be freaking out.
Although I feel like it would be the opposite. I feel like Kevin's like, I'm a white guy. I'm comfortable. I'm living the life over here. And I would think, I don't want to be a slave. Like, get me out of here. But Dana's like,
oh, drop me in any other time period but 1815. Lord bless you.
Yes.
Drop me somewhere else.
Shoot, I don't even want to be in the 50s.
There you go. There you go.
I
Yep.
need to be in like,
Give me at least
ancient
after
lake.
the civil rights movement. At least
Yes,
after
there
that,
you go. Yeah, at least after that. Yeah, please.
Just send me to the land of Kush, and I'll be happy. I'll be a queen. Anyways, so Kevin is called back into the big house, and they end up meeting Dr. West, who's played by David DeFries. He's thankful Kevin is there. They need all the help they can get to kind of hold Margaret back and hold down Rufus while they bleed him and reset his broken leg. And the doctor's saying they need to bleed out Rufus because he's been outside in the cold, and if they bleed him, they'll take out the bad blood, which will cause a fever. And Dana's like, Dana's of the modern day. She's like, hold on, that's not a good idea. That's not going to be necessary to bleed him. And this greatly offends the doctor. He demands that Kevin keep basically his slave in check. And he's like, the audacity of this wench to even look me in the eye. Like, they are just not happy with Dana. So that takes care of that. They go upstairs. Thomas holds back Margaret while Luke and Dana restrain Rufus, and then Thomas is manhandling her because she's crazy, and he slaps her, and Kevin's just looking on like, what am I supposed to do? They eventually restrain Margaret, and they kind of give her something that sedates her, and then Kevin attends to her as the rest of the group resets Rufus's leg. Kevin and Margaret, they kind of have a talk amidst Rufus's screams. Margaret is disappointed they're not going to be able to have their Christmas party. She was trying to inject some joy into their home. And Kevin, unsure of what to do, what to say. He sees the piano nearby. He begins to play, which seems to soothe Margaret. And then she realizes that Rufus must have passed out because he's not screaming anymore. And then Thomas ends up being very impressed with Kevin's musical talent and thanks him for his help. And he asks Kevin to join them for supper. So I can stop there for that brief scene. It's a lot. I don't want my leg reset in the 1800s, that's for sure.
Yeah, their medicine in that time period, hard pass. In Dr. West, he come up in there coughing and I don't know what he's drinking, didn't wash his hands. I was like, just fix it. It was just, the whole scene was just horrible. And when you hear about the past too, about slaves, about some of those doctors that were experimenting on slaves because they were trying to figure out different, medicines or whatever, different surgeries or whatever like that. He just was so creepy to me. I could not wait for him to be done. I was like, this guy needs to go. Like, he just 100% creepy vibes. I obviously hated the way he was talking to Dana, was scared for Dana. I was like, girl, don't do it, because you could tell she's getting ready to say something. Just that boldness that she has, and like not afraid, and she's gonna go after, and she's still in that time period of when she jumps in the past for a little bit, she's not worried about the consequences, which I guess is a double-edged sword for her as she continues to navigate this world. So the resetting of the leg, the only thing I could hear was the screaming. I tried to focus on, Kevin coming down, playing the piano, their conversation, but it's just like all you can hear is just that piercing screaming in the background. And just the whole scene is just uncomfortable in so many ways. Going back to like Margaret and Tom, like the little thing they were having scuffle because she's losing her complete mind and having to be drugged and everything. The whole thing was just so awkward when it turned up. But yeah, it's just more of that piercing screaming that's all I could hear until, like you said, Angelica, he must have passed out because it stopped at some moment. But you're just trying to focus on, Kevin trying to do something, like anything he could do, like music to kind of cope. He starts playing the piano, but that's all I could hear in the background. It just was staying with me, like that piercing scream, and like how I really, like you said, I really wouldn't want any kind of surgery back in this day, to have to get anything done. And just by Dr. West himself, I was like, yeah, hard pass.
Jamie?
Hard pass. Yeah. I mean, you bring up a good point, Ryan, that Kevin uses playing the piano as like a coping mechanism. I mean, he's probably dealing with some stress and just undue pressure of going through all of this stuff that he's dealing with all this time travel, and that he's playing the piano as a way to just kind of relieve the stress. Him as a musician, this is something that he's familiar with. So that's just a great point that you brought up, that it's a coping mechanism. And Dr. West is trash. I mean,
Yep.
He's trash. But that is the way these doctors operated back then. I mean, they would do bleed outs, they would amputate people unnecessarily and do all of these weird kind of methods. I mean, I don't know. We've covered Game of Thrones and talked about how how they would deal with different kinds of remedies and medicines for healing and stuff. But poor Rufus, just to have to deal with that type of medical attention is just unfortunate. So yeah.
Yeah, and having Margaret along didn't really help. So,
No, definitely not.
Definitely not. So Dana overhears Thomas and Dr. West arguing about payment, which Thomas doesn't have it. He don't got the money. So he ends up offering
I ain't got it.
He ain't got it.
Yeah, I'm broke.
Yeah, he offers up Sabina to Dr. West, suggesting her strange condition would excite him as he's a man of science. So back to the point about white doctors experimenting on black slaves, like the father of modern day gynecology experimented on 3 black slaves with no type of anesthesia. Just I'll leave your minds to that. But so it's not looking good for Sabina. So the doctor ends up taking him up on his offer, and Sabina ain't happy about this. She's like, why do I have to go? And Thomas is like, oh, it'll be fine. You're not going very far. You can visit whenever you want. So yeah, not a good ending for Sabina. Who knows what's gonna happen to her? And Rufus ends up calling for Dana, and Dana's just like, how do you even know my name? And he's like, well, I heard Kevin saying your name. And he's like, I saw him dragging you out of the door in my head when I was falling. So there's obviously some type of not psychic or emotional connection between Rufus and Dana. That's why they're so drawn to each other. And he asked Dana if he's going to leave her again or leave him again. And she says no, sorry. So Rufus realizes that Dana can read, and Rufus warns her, like, if his father caught her reading, she would get beaten like she stole something. Like, that's basically what he said. Slaves have been beaten like the same way if they had stolen something. And Dana's like, your dad can't tell me what to do, which Rufus thinks is kind of funny. And then he asks Dana to read to him. So she begins to read Gulliver's Travels, but they're interrupted by Margaret. And she's, asking if Rufus is comfortable, and then allows Dana to read to him. But she doesn't really allow Dana to read to him because she keeps interrupting. She's like, oh, Rufus, are you okay? Do you want a snack? Do you want a pillow? And he's just like, mother, go away. I just want Dana to read to me. Get out. Ugh. And, it hurts Margaret's feelings. She's like, how dare you choose me over that wench? And she runs out, and Rufus is like, she'll be okay. She's going to come back later and give me cake. And that's exactly what she does. After Dana finishes reading to Rufus, he falls asleep, and Margaret returns with a piece of cake for him. And she ends up dismissing Dana. So I'll stop there for, I guess you can elaborate on how awful Margaret is.
Yeah, that lady is just. Whew. But my heart just breaks for Sabina. It's no telling what's gonna happen. You could do we could have a whole episode on just how just treacherous in those time periods the doctors experiment on slaves. Just something added on to, how slaves were, used in just so many just unnecessary, just inhumane ways that you could just do a whole episode on just how crazy that stuff was. But yeah, just my heart breaks when I saw that, when you see her just walking out the door. And but yeah, Margaret, she just this is the first time I was actually laughing at something Rufus had to say, because he just like shoot her away. He was like, get away from me. I don't want any of that stuff. I just want to hear Dana read. And I just like the way he just kind of and I was also kind of surprised too, though. I didn't think he was gonna actually put his mom in check like that. But I guess Margaret is that kind of person that's just all over the place, where it just get on his nerves so bad, where he was just like, get on away from me. I don't want to deal with it anymore. But yeah, just the way she's like, just the coddling and that it's just, I don't know, it's just so bad. It's just bad parenting. It's just they're just rough. Her and Thomas just, I don't know about Rufus as he continues to grow up. And hopefully Dana continue to save him, because I could just see this boy like in serious trouble, and Thomas and Margaret are doing whatever they do, whatever they consider just, and it's just like, well, who's gonna be there to save them? So I guess it's good that him and Dana have this connection, you know, somebody that he can kind of talk to and kind of voice, because his parents are all over the place. But yeah, Margaret, I'm like nervous to see what she ends up to in this series, because this is the beginning and she's already on like level 20. So it's gonna be interesting to see where she goes from here.
Yeah. Jamie?
Yeah, going back to Sabina, since this episode is named after her, again, my heart just breaks for her. Black women being used for science is as old as time, and even as recent as the Henrietta Lacks story, like it just it repeats over and over again. So it just breaks my heart hearing about Sabina's story. As far as what is happening between Rufus, Dana, and Margaret, what I found very interesting is that, you know, Rufus warns Dana that if his father finds out that she knew how to read, that she would get beaten. But yet Margaret, who is very vicious herself, who is very, you know, backstabbish type, you know, vindictive kind of woman, elects to stay silent about that. And I just thought that was, I don't know, I guess we mentioned earlier how she's a bit of a mama bear and how she's very overbearing over her son. And she cares greatly enough about her son that she's willing to overlook Dana's ability to read, her literacy, for the sake of her son having that comfort of being read to him. So that was, you know, that's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah. Margaret is the epitome of a helicopter mom. She's she's too much. So he, you know, like you mentioned, or Ryan mentioned, he has one parent that couldn't care less about him, and he has one parent that cares way too much. So I don't think Rufus is going to grow up to be a good person, but that's just me.
He will.
So Kevin and Thomas are having supper, and you know, Kevin's asking where's Dana, and Thomas says he's upstairs. You know, she's upstairs with Rufus, who's really taken a liking to her. Kevin's like, yeah, Dana's really good with children. So he offers to reward Dana by sending her a warm bowl of mush, which I was like, gee, thanks, really appreciate that. They start talking about Charles Brodus, who owns 100+ acres in a neighboring plantation. He's moving to England, and Thomas wants to buy his land. And then Thomas starts to ask more about Kevin and his background. Does he have a wife back home? And Kevin lies horribly once again and says he did have a wife, but she died. And then we learn a little bit about Thomas. Thomas, his first wife died from fever, along with some of his servants, and I believe his father or her father. I didn't quite catch that, but he lost a lot of people. And apparently his wife was a very talented musician like Kevin, and the piano that Kevin played earlier in the episode belonged to his first wife. So Thomas ends up offering up his home to Kevin for a few more days, and he will also make some inquiries about the thieves who took off with Kevin's instruments and, you know, that robbed him of his clothes. So that night, Dana tells Kevin that she believes Rufus is the reason why she's returning to the past. We as viewers have pretty much deduced that already. And Kevin's really uncomfortable. Like they need to go. They've already been there for so many hours. And, you know, Dana's like, we're not going to have answers until we see my mom. They end up getting a visit from Margaret, who apologizes for her behavior and thanks Kevin for helping them. And then she offers to take Dana to proper lodgings, you know, meant for slaves. And obviously Dana wants to stay together, so she insists on staying with Kevin. And Margaret's like, no, you need to go where the slaves go. So she kind of reassures Kevin that Dana's going to go to the slave quarters. The room is actually right above Kevin's own room, and if he really needs Dana, he can just ring for her. And so Dana's taken upstairs to a cold attic and made to sleep on a simple mattress on the floor. She settles down next to another slave girl who's crying in her sleep. And back in his room, Kevin is calming himself down by listening to Tomorrow Never Knows by Junior Parker. And he's also snapping pictures of his room before he falls asleep. And then, you know, simultaneously we see a glimpse of Dana falling asleep as well. So that's how the episode ends. So your final thoughts on this episode?
Yeah, I know Kevin is a bad liar, but I couldn't tell with the wife thing. I think he got me on that one because I was like, is he slightly telling the truth on that one or not? But but also that was an enlightening conversation to learn a little bit about Thomas. So maybe that's why him and Margaret are such like not right at all. Like it's just awkward.
Yeah.
So maybe that shed some light on that one a little bit. And yeah, as far as like Dana and Margaret, like it's gonna be interesting between those two. Margaret is definitely jealous. You could tell that Dana has that pull with Rufus. You know, when you kind of continue to see that unfold of like just their connection they have and what's that gonna do to Margaret, because she's just all, like you said, helicopter mom, you know, all just living for her son. So if something goes left or he's not paying attention to her, I just feel like that's a bad moment for her. So that person is like in her line of fire. So she's gonna be trying to target and kind of go after that person. So it's going to be interesting. And I like how she kind of try to dress it up. Oh, she's just going to be right above you and you can ring for her and it's nice quarters. I'm like, girl, is anybody buying what you're talking about? I guess maybe Kevin was. Maybe he wasn't paying attention to what's going on. But I just like how she was trying to like dress it up as much as she could when we know what was going down. And then I was wondering too, when Dana got up into the attic or whatever, the other slave that was sent up there was crying. I was wondering if she knew Sabina, but maybe I was just trying to connect too much. She could have just been crying.
She could have been crying over Sabina.
You know, there was like a lot of stuff. Yeah, I was just kind of wondering if there was a connection there. Seeing her kind of roll over, like, you know, kind of looking at Dana, and she's just like, I'm rolling over, going to sleep, and she was crying. So. And, you know, again, Kevin got his music, you know, his music and his technology. Hopefully nobody catches him with it. But I mean, Thomas might buy it because Thomas just not buying any clues at all. So he might not think anything of it. But I'm just thinking about him having this phone out and somebody catching him like, what is this device and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah. So we'll see. It's getting interesting.
Jamie?
Indeed. Yeah, I had touched on it a little bit before, but it was good seeing that dynamic or seeing that the moment with Thomas opening up about, you know, his wife and that moment between him and Kevin at the piano. So yeah, I think it's interesting that we finally get to see Thomas opening up about who he is, and then we see the relationship that Thomas previously had with, you know, his first wife, I guess. And the fact that, you know, now we kind of know why there's some distance between him and Margaret, because you don't sense that they're a loving couple at all.
No.
So he's still, it looks like he's still in love with his widow, and he really hasn't gotten over her. And maybe some of his misdirected anger and just frustration over him not being able to have that person in his life is being misdirected onto his current wife, who he resents in a very unfair way. So yeah, that was, it was good to see sort of that layer of the onion peeled for Thomas's character. And overall, I really enjoyed this episode. I think it was absolutely fantastic. I still feel for Sabina. I'm curious why they decided to title it Sabina. That is something that is striking to me. But yeah, curious to see where we go next.
Well, I would say also, to add to your point about the way that Thomas treats Margaret, that could not be another reason why she's so close to Rufus, because she's not getting that love or attention from her husband. So then she overcompensates with her son. So I thought maybe that could be interesting. But as far as Sabina, I'm trying to figure out, maybe does her name mean something? What does Sabina mean? Let me see if that comes up with anything.
That's true.
It's Italian.
I mean, it's probably a slave name, so it probably doesn't have any meaning to her.
What does Sabina mean? I just want to know if there's any relevance to this. Hold on one second. Just oblige me.
Yeah. Because it's like, I wonder, because she's not really a significant character, and we don't really see her throughout the rest of the series. So why name the episode after her?
It's just about the women of this Italian city called Sabine. It can also mean cat-like. So I don't know. I don't think there's any meaning behind her name. Maybe they're just trying to shed a light on what happens to Black bodies in the past. But yeah, this episode was entitled Sabina. So yeah, I'll turn it over back to you, Jamie, since we've wrapped this super stuffed episode of the Kindred recap show.
Indeed. I will find out, because we will be doing interviews. I will find out the meaning behind Sabina and why episode 2 was titled that way. But we are wrapping up this episode recap of Kindred, and we're going to bring you some more, because it wasn't just 2 episodes, right? All of them have dropped all of them have dropped on FX, so you can binge watch them all, but we will come out later with some additional recaps and just kind of give you an overview of the show and our opinions and thoughts, as we've done on this recap. And we look forward to seeing you guys next time, and thanks for joining us. I hope that you come back again.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Better shake your booties for Black girl nerds. Better shake your booties for Black girl nerds.